In the midst of a relentless snowstorm, Jack Mercer sat alone at his dog's grave, his heart heavy with grief. His loyal companion Rex had been more than just a dog. He had been Jack's partner in battle, his rock in the darkest of times. The pain of losing Rex with no closure or final goodbye haunted Jack more than any war wound. But on this stormy day, a small, frail girl appeared carrying a secret wrapped in cloth, Rex's collar. She spoke the unthinkable, "Your dog might still be alive." Could this child's claim be the answer Jack had been searching for? Watch the full video to discover the shocking truth and the journey that followed. A heavy snowstorm had descended upon the small village of Ashpine, blanketing the town in a thick, white silence. The wind howled through the trees, swirling the snowflakes like dancers in a relentless storm. In the distance, the outlines of the old cemetery could barely be seen, the snow piling up against the tombstones, erasing the signs of life. But there, sitting alone, was Jack Mercer, his once strong frame now hunched with age, sitting quietly next to the cold stone of Rex's grave. Jack's breath came in shallow gasps, visible in the cold air as it fogged around him. He was a man hardened by battle, his body scarred by years of war. But the wounds left by Rex's absence were deeper than anything he had ever faced on the battlefield. His heart ached, a dull pain that refused to ease no matter how many times he came to visit this spot. Rex had been more than just a dog. He had been Jack's partner, his confidant, his family. They had served together, fought together, and survived together. Through the darkest moments of war, it had always been Rex who stood by his side, offering silent comfort in the middle of chaos. The bond they shared was unspoken, yet so deep that it transcended words. But now Rex was gone. The grave was simple, a weathered stone almost lost beneath the thick layer of snow. No body had ever been found. The explosion that had torn through the cabin had consumed everything in its path, leaving behind only charred remains and the echoes of a battle long fought. They had told Jack that Rex had perished in the fire, just another casualty of war. But Jack refused to accept it. There had been no closure, no body, no final goodbye. Every day Jack came here despite the snow, despite the cold. He brushed the snow off the stone with his gloved hands, muttering words that were only meant for Rex, knowing full well that his loyal companion would never hear them. His mind would often drift back to the days when Rex had been by his side, the way the dog's amber eyes had always watched him, the way they had communicated without speaking. Those memories were both a comfort and a curse, reminders of a bond that could never be replaced. Jack sat in the snow, not moving, not leaving. The storm raged on around him, but it felt as though the world had slowed, as if time itself had paused in reverence for the memories he held. There was no place for him to go. No place where he could leave the pain behind. The silence of the graveyard pressed down on him, the storm becoming a distant hum in the back of his mind. In this moment, Jack wasn't just mourning the loss of his dog. He was mourning the loss of the part of himself that had gone with Rex. The quiet, steadfast presence that had once been his strength now seemed like a distant memory. The grief was consuming him, and he didn't know if he would ever find his way back from it. Then, as if carried by the very wind itself, a small figure appeared at the edge of his vision. A shadow moved against the snow, small and fragile, cutting through the storm. Jack blinked, confused, as he looked up. It wasn't a shape he had expected to see on a day like this. A little girl, her hair messy and damp from the snow, moved carefully through the drifts, leaning on a metal crutch with each step. She was no more than 5 years old, and her movements seemed deliberate, but slow, as though each step was taken with a great deal of effort. She wore a tattered coat that hung loosely from her slight frame, not nearly enough to protect her from the brutality of the storm. Jack squinted against the wind, unsure of what he was seeing. This was not a place for a child, especially in the middle of a blizzard like this. Who was she? How had she gotten here? The girl's eyes met his for a brief moment, and there was something in her gaze, something unyielding, that struck Jack to the core. She was no ordinary child. She moved toward him, each step slower than the last, until she finally reached his side. As she stopped in front of him, she extended a hand, her small fingers grasping something wrapped in cloth. Jack looked at her, confusion still written on his face. But before he could speak, she quietly whispered, "Your dog might still be alive." The storm howled, whipping snowflakes violently through the air, as if nature itself was intent on swallowing everything in its path. Jack watched, still dazed, as the little girl approached him. She was tiny, fragile-looking, yet determined in her every step. Each time her crutch sank into the snow, she leaned a little more heavily on it, pushing herself forward against the fierce wind, her face set with quiet resolve. Her coat, threadbare and ragged, clung to her slight frame, offering little protection from the icy onslaught of the storm. Her blonde hair, wet from the snow, clung to her cheeks in damp strands. She was too young to be out here, Jack thought. This place in the middle of a blizzard wasn't meant for a child, especially one so frail, so vulnerable. Jack's heart clenched slightly as he stared at her, but his thoughts were interrupted by her eyes, green and fierce with an unshakable determination in them. It was as if her gaze carried an unspoken message, a quiet strength that belied her small frame. There was something different about this child. Jack couldn't place it. There was a sense of purpose in the way she moved, something beyond the sheer physical struggle of navigating the storm. She came to a stop right in front of him, standing there as the wind howled around them. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but the words were caught in his throat. Before he could say anything, the girl extended her hand. In it, she held something wrapped tightly in cloth, the corners of the fabric soaked with melting snow. Jack stared at her, his confusion deepening. He could hardly believe what was happening. Who was this child, and why was she here? Yet the moment he laid eyes on the object in her hand, a strange feeling stirred in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but the warmth in her small hand seemed to transmit something, like a fleeting sense of familiarity. Here she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I found this. It's his." She unfolded the cloth, revealing the worn leather collar still stained with the dirt and grime of days spent in the elements. Jack's eyes widened in shock. He could hardly breathe as the collar was presented to him. There, engraved into the metal plate, was the single word that had haunted him for months: Rex. For a moment, time seemed to stop. His mind raced. How could she have this? How could she know about the collar? Rex had been gone for so long, and yet here it was, as real and tangible as the breath in Jack's lungs. "Where did you find this?" Jack's voice was hoarse, his hand trembling as he reached out for the collar. His heart pounded in his chest. It couldn't be. Could it? Emily shifted slightly, her gaze never wavering from his. "I saw him," she said, her words calm and steady. "They keep him in a cage. He's not far." The world seemed to tilt around Jack. His breath caught in his throat as he fought to grasp what she was saying. Rex. The dog he had lost, the companion he had mourned for months, might still be alive. But how? Why hadn't anyone else seen him? Why hadn't anyone else known? 1,000 questions filled Jack's mind, each one more urgent than the last. "What do you mean? Where is he? How do you know?" His voice cracked with desperation, but Emily simply nodded, her small hand still holding the collar tightly. "I saw him," she repeated. "I can take you to him if you want." Jack's heart thudded in his chest. The weight of her words settled into him like a leaden stone. Could it be true? Could Rex still be alive? A part of him wanted to reject the idea, to dismiss it as the fantasy of a child, but something in the girl's eyes, something in her voice, told him this wasn't a game. Her gaze was unwavering, the kind of certainty that only came from someone who had witnessed something they could never forget. Jack swallowed hard. The snow fell heavier, the wind howling louder, but in that moment nothing else mattered. He nodded, the faintest flicker of hope igniting inside him. "Take me to him." The girl nodded once, then turned slowly, moving toward the edge of the graveyard. Jack followed, his heart racing. The storm raged around them, but Jack's focus was singular now, Rex. For the first time since the explosion, there was a glimmer of hope, fragile as it was that the bond between man and dog had not been completely severed. The storm howled, but it couldn't drown the sound of Jack's footsteps echoing in the snow. The storm had not let up, as they walked the heavy snow swirling around them, stinging Jack's face. Emily led the way, her crutch sinking into the snow with each determined step. Jack followed closely, his breath coming in short bursts, a mixture of disbelief and anticipation gnawing at him. Every so often he would glance at the girl, wondering what could possibly be going through her young mind. She had spoken with such certainty, such quiet conviction, yet Jack couldn't shake the doubt that clung to him. She was just a child. What did she know of where Rex might be? How could she have seen him? He swallowed hard, trying to suppress the storm of questions, but each one seemed to weigh more heavily with each step. The graveyard faded behind them as they reached the edge of the town, where the snow-covered ground stretched into a thick, dense forest. The trees of Fog Ridge loomed ahead, their dark branches reaching out like twisted arms, casting long shadows over the path. The atmosphere felt ominous, the wind howling through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine, but not from the cold. Something about this place, something about the silence that had settled over the forest felt wrong. Emily turned to face him, her eyes still steady, unshaken. She looked like she had seen too much for her age, like someone who had witnessed things most people never would. "Rex is there," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the howling wind. "In a place where the men who hurt him keep him. They use the dogs for things no dog should do, but I saw him, I swear it." Jack's heart clenched, his thoughts racing. He wanted to argue, to question her, but there was no hesitation in her gaze. There was no sign of doubt in the way she spoke, just a raw honesty that pierced through him like the cold itself. He had lived a life full of uncertainty. His military days, the war, the loss of Rex. And now, standing here in the storm with this child, he felt something stir within him, a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Still, the idea of Rex being held captive, forced to fight or obey in some cruel, twisted training facility, it was too much to bear. But Jack couldn't ignore the truth in Emily's words. He had seen too much in his own life to dismiss someone else's truth so easily. "You're sure?" Jack's voice was thick, heavy with the emotion he couldn't quite name. Emily nodded firmly. "Yes, Mr. Mercer. I know what I saw. Rex was there behind a fence with other dogs. They make them fight, train them to be something they're not. But he was still Rex. I can feel it." Jack stopped walking for a moment, his mind spinning. Rex, alive but not free. He had always wondered, always doubted, but now there was a part of him that couldn't ignore what Emily was saying. Could it really be true? Could Rex still be out there waiting for him? His heart began to race as the possibility began to take root in his mind. But why would they keep him? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would they keep a dog like Rex in a place like that? Emily's eyes softened, the wisdom of someone far beyond her years reflected in them. Because they can make them do things, hurt things, things they never wanted to do. They make the dogs obey or they hurt them more. But Rex, he's different. He won't give up. Not like the others. Jack nodded, his chest tightening. He didn't know what to think, but something inside him told him to keep going, to follow Emily, to believe her. He had lost too much in his life, and this was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose again. His bond with Rex had been more than just a partnership. It was a deep, unshakable connection that had survived the worst of times. Jack took a deep breath, his resolve hardening like ice forming in the storm. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Take me to him. I don't know what's waiting, but I'll find him. I have to." Emily's face lit up with the faintest smile, the kind of smile that came from a heart that had endured more than anyone should have to. She nodded, the determination still shining in her eyes. "I'll show you," she said. "He's not far. Just follow me." With those words, Emily turned and started toward the thick trees of Fog Ridge. Jack followed every step heavier than the last, but now there was something else stirring within him. Purpose. Whatever lay ahead, whatever dangers he would face them with Rex in his heart, and nothing would stop him from finding his friend. Jack's decision was final. The moment that those words left his mouth, something inside him shifted, like the storm that had been raging outside finally began to clear. He had no idea what he would face, or what dangers lurked in the thick frozen woods of Fog Ridge, but he knew this was something he couldn't walk away from. For months he had been stuck in a cycle of grief, unable to move past the loss of Rex, but now there was a spark, a fragile thread of hope that told him he might still be able to find his loyal companion, the one who had stood by his side through everything. The wind howled as they moved deeper into the forest, but Jack felt a steady calm wash over him. His mind, once clouded with doubt, was now focused on one goal: finding Rex. Every step he took felt more purposeful than the last, and though the snow underfoot was thick, Jack moved forward with determination. But as the forest grew darker and the trees closer, the reality of the situation began to settle in. Jack's thoughts drifted back to the warnings he had received before leaving town. Clara, a former police officer and an old friend, had tried to talk him out of this. She had been the one who had held his hand after Rex's supposed death, who had helped him pick up the pieces when the explosion had torn apart his world. Clara knew how much Rex had meant to Jack, but even she, practical and grounded, had said this wasn't something he should pursue. "Jack, you need to let it go," she had said, her voice heavy with concern when they spoke the day before. "You've been through enough. The chances of him being alive—" "I can't, Clara," Jack had interrupted, his voice raw with the grief he'd tried to bury. "I've lived through wars, through hell. But this feels wrong. I don't know how, but I feel it in my gut. Rex is still out there." Clara had paused, her face creased with worry. "Jack, it's dangerous out there. People don't go into Fog Ridge, not unless they want to disappear. The people in town, they've seen things. No one talks about it, but there's something wrong in those woods." "I don't care," Jack had answered, shaking his head. "I have to do this." Now standing in the midst of the storm, Jack could almost feel Clara's voice still lingering in his mind. Her words had been meant to protect him, but Jack knew that he couldn't turn back now. He had to find Rex no matter what it cost him. Emily's voice cut through his thoughts, soft but determined. "We're almost there." Jack looked up, pushing aside the doubt that still tugged at the edges of his mind. He nodded, though part of him still wondered if what he was doing was reckless. There was no map, no guide. Just a small girl with an unshakable belief in something Jack could hardly bring himself to understand. But the connection he had with Rex was enough to drown out any fear, any hesitation. They trudged through the thick snow, the forest around them growing darker with each step. Jack's heartbeat quickened. This was real. Rex was real. And with every passing moment, Jack's hope grew stronger, even as the storm intensified, as if nature itself was trying to test his resolve. In the distance, the outline of Fog Ridge loomed, its trees thick and imposing. Jack's breath came out in ragged bursts, but there was no turning back. He was in this now, committed to finding Rex no matter the cost. The bond they shared, forged in battle and tempered by years of loyalty, would not be severed by distance or time. For the first time since that horrible day, Jack felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months: hope. The journey to Fog Ridge was harder than Jack had anticipated. With each step, the snow thickened and the air grew colder, pressing against them like a wall. The towering trees of the forest loomed overhead, their bare branches twisted and gnarled, as if they had witnessed centuries of storms and secrets. The wind howled through the trees, sending a chill down Jack's spine, but he barely noticed anymore. The cold had long since numbed him, both physically and emotionally. Emily moved ahead of him, her crutch sinking into the deep snow with each step, but she didn't falter. Jack couldn't help but marvel at her resilience. Despite the harsh conditions, the small girl never once slowed her pace. She moved with a quiet determination, as if she had grown up walking through blizzards like this, as though it was second nature to her. Her prosthetic leg, glinting faintly in the dim light, seemed to only add to her strength rather than diminish it. As they trudged through the snow, Jack's thoughts drifted to the girl walking in front of him. He hadn't known much about her when they first met. She had appeared out of nowhere, a small figure braving the storm with a message that could change everything. But now as he followed her through the storm, he could sense there was more to Emily than met the eye. There was something in the way she moved, something that spoke of a life much harder than any child should have to live. "Emily," Jack said softly, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "How did you know where to find Rex?" Emily didn't immediately respond. Instead, she paused for a moment, her crutch sinking deeper into the snow before looking up at him. Her face was pale, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but her eyes, those eyes, remained steady, unwavering. "I've seen things," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had lived far beyond her years. "I don't know why, but I know when something's wrong, when someone needs help." Jack listened closely, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean you knew Rex was still alive, didn't you?" Emily nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the ground for a brief moment before she spoke again. "I didn't know for sure, but I could feel it, like I was meant to find him and to help you." Jack felt a lump form in his throat, the vulnerability in her voice striking him harder than he expected. "And where did you learn to be so strong?" Emily didn't answer right away. She simply kept walking, her eyes scanning the path ahead. Jack noticed the way her crutch sank deeper into the snow, with each step the effort clearly wearing on her. But she refused to stop, refused to let the cold or the storm slow her down. "Because I had to," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't have anyone else. My mom, she's gone, and my dad, well, he's not around either. I had to take care of myself, so I got used to being alone." Jack's heart tightened at her words. He had no idea what Emily had been through, but in that moment he understood. The girl before him wasn't just a child with a prosthetic leg. She was a survivor, someone who had been forced to grow up too soon to bear burdens that no one should have to carry. "I'm sorry," Jack said, his voice rough with the emotion that threatened to break through. "You didn't deserve any of that." Emily looked up at him, then her green eyes bright with something Jack couldn't quite place, something between sadness and strength. "I don't need your pity," she said softly. "I just need to finish what I started. For Rex, for me." Jack nodded, understanding her more than she could know. He didn't pity her. He admired her. The way she carried her pain and still moved forward, still had hope. He had lost that somewhere along the way, but now, with her by his side, it felt like he could find it again. The wind picked up again, the storm howling with renewed fury, but Jack didn't care. They were close now, close to Fog Ridge, close to finding Rex. As they continued their trek through the snow, Emily began to speak again, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were sharing a secret. "I used to dream about Rex, about finding him again, and now it feels like I've finally found something that makes sense." Jack didn't reply immediately. He just nodded, focusing on the path ahead, the weight of her words settling deep inside him. They didn't talk much more as they walked. The storm seemed to close in around them, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people bound by something unspoken, a common goal, and a shared understanding that the journey wasn't just about finding Rex anymore. It was about healing, about forgiveness, about reclaiming what they had lost. The storm raged on as Jack and Emily pushed forward through the dense, snow-covered forest of Fog Ridge. The cold seemed to intensify with each step, the wind biting at their exposed skin. Emily, despite her fragile appearance, moved with purpose, her crutch cutting through the snow with determination. Jack followed closely, his mind racing. Each step closer to Fog Ridge felt heavier, more real, as if they were approaching something that would change everything. The path ahead became narrower, the trees pressing closer together, their gnarled branches weaving a canopy that blocked out much of the fading daylight. The storm's fury swallowed the world around them, but Jack's focus remained fixed. They were close. They had to be. The hope that had been kindling inside him ever since Emily first handed him Rex's collar grew brighter with every passing moment. Suddenly, as they pushed through a thick cluster of trees, the storm began to settle for a brief moment, and the forest opened up to reveal a clearing ahead. Jack's eyes narrowed as he squinted through the swirling snow. In the distance, barely visible through the haze, were a series of rough buildings, rusted metal walls, makeshift fencing, and large, shadowy structures that looked more like cages than shelters. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Emily stopped in her tracks, her eyes fixed on the sight ahead, and Jack could feel the tension in her small frame. She had led him here, and now, as they stood at the edge of the clearing, he understood why. "That's it," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of sadness and certainty. "That's where they keep them." Jack's stomach dropped as he scanned the area. The place was a far cry from anything that could be called a proper training facility. It looked like a makeshift compound, ramshackle structures scattered haphazardly across the clearing, surrounded by a tall, crude fence made of metal and wire. The sounds of dogs barking, muffled by the howling wind, drifted through the air, sending a chill down Jack's spine. His heart pounded harder as the realization hit him. This was no place for any animal, let alone Rex. Jack's hands tightened into fists, his jaw clenched with growing anger. The dogs, their howls, their whines, seemed to echo in his mind, pulling him closer to the grim reality of what he was about to witness. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "They don't treat them like they're anything more than tools. They train them to fight, to obey, or else—" She trailed off, her voice faltering. Jack's anger surged, a fire burning deep within him. How could anyone do this to innocent creatures? The thought of Rex, his loyal companion, being subjected to this kind of cruelty pushed Jack to the edge of his control. He wanted to charge in to storm the place and free every single dog trapped behind those metal fences, but he knew better than to rush in recklessly. "This place," Jack muttered, his voice dark with disgust. "It's nothing but a prison for dogs." "I can't believe they're doing this." Emily nodded, her eyes shadowed with something deeper than sadness. "I've seen it. They make them do things. Things no dog should ever be made to do. They break their spirits piece by piece until they're nothing but machines, obedient and silent." Jack looked at her, his expression softening for a moment. He could see the pain in her eyes, the trauma of what she had witnessed. No child should have to bear such weight on their shoulders, and Jack couldn't help but feel a rush of protectiveness for her. "I won't let them do this anymore," Jack said firmly, his voice steady with determination. "I won't leave without Rex." They moved forward, careful not to make any noise, their presence barely registering against the backdrop of the storm. As they neared the edge of the compound, Jack could see the shadows of the dogs in the cages, lean, broken animals pacing back and forth, their eyes hollow and full of fear. Rex. He had to be here. Jack's heart raced, and he felt the pull of his connection to Rex growing stronger, guiding him closer. But just as they reached the fence, a voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the storm. "Who's there?" Jack froze. His muscles tensed as he turned toward the voice, but before he could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man in dark, weathered clothing, his face obscured by a hood and a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. The man's eyes flicked to Emily and then to Jack. His gaze hardened as he stepped forward, blocking their path. "Turn back," the man growled. "This is no place for you." Jack stood his ground, refusing to back down. "I'm here for the dogs. I'm here for Rex." The man's expression darkened, and he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Turn back before it's too late." Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Rex anymore. This was about stopping whatever twisted operation was happening here. He couldn't leave without getting answers, without doing something to help. "I won't leave without him," Jack said, his voice unwavering. The man before Jack, his eyes cold and calculating, took a step forward, blocking their path with an unspoken warning. Jack could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Emily stood silently beside him, her eyes darting from Jack to the man, sensing the danger that was rapidly closing in. "Turn back now," the man said again, his voice rough, the menace in his tone unmistakable. You have no idea what you're walking into. Leave while you still can." Jack's heart raced, but he stood firm, his gaze never wavering from the man. This wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. Jack could sense the violence just beneath the surface of the stranger's words. His thoughts flashed to Rex. The dog had been here. Jack had to believe that. Rex's memory burned bright in his mind, the bond they shared too strong for any fear to take root. "I'm not going anywhere," Jack said, his voice low but resolute. "I'm here for Rex. I'll find him, and I'll bring him home." The man's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a grimace. "You think you can just walk in here, take a dog, and leave without consequences? This place is more than just a training ground, it's a business, and you're messing with things you don't understand." Jack's pulse quickened. The man's words didn't just echo threats, they hinted at something far darker. Jack could feel the gravity of the situation now, but the need to find Rex pushed him forward. He wasn't backing down. "I'm not afraid of you," Jack said, his voice firm. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving the man's. "I'm not afraid of anything. Not after everything I've been through. I came here for one reason. To find Rex, and nothing will stop me." The man snorted, shaking his head with an air of mockery. "You're out of your depth, soldier. I don't think you realize how deep this goes. You're messing with people who don't play by the rules. You'll regret it if you keep going." Jack's grip tightened on the strap of his jacket, but he didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to leave without Rex, no matter what it took. Without another word, the man raised his hand, signaling for two others to step out from the shadows. They moved quickly, surrounding Jack and Emily, their movements fluid, almost rehearsed. Jack's instincts kicked in, but he held back, unwilling to escalate the situation. Yet. "Grab them," the man ordered. His voice had shifted, becoming more commanding, more dangerous. "They'll learn the hard way what happens when you try to mess with our operation." Before Jack could react, one of the men lunged forward, grabbing his arms and pinning them behind his back. The grip was strong like iron, but Jack didn't resist. He knew he had to stay calm. He had to think. Rex was close, and Jack could feel it. His heart raced as they dragged him towards the compound. The man now revealed as Gage stepped forward, his cold eyes studying Jack carefully. "You think this is just about a dog?" Gage's voice was low, almost mocking. "This is business. We breed dogs, train them for specialized operations. We own them. We control them. And you think you can just come in here and take one?" Jack's mind raced. Every word Gage said twisted in Jack's gut, but he refused to show weakness. Gage had made a mistake. Jack wasn't here to beg. He wasn't here for mercy. "I'll take Rex," Jack said, his voice unflinching. "And I'll take him home." Gage chuckled darkly, the sound sending a shiver down Jack's spine. "We'll see about that," he said. "But first you'll learn what happens when you cross us." Jack felt a sharp pain in his wrist as one of Gage's men tightened their grip. He was forced to the ground, his knees scraping against the cold dirt. As the harsh reality of the situation settled in Jack's mind, focused only on one thing, Rex was close, and he wasn't going to leave without him. The last thing Jack heard before the world around him faded into a blur of darkness was Gage's voice, taunting and cold. "You'll regret this, Mercer. The moment you set foot in here, you became part of something far bigger than you can handle." Jack's head spun as the darkness closed in around him. The last thing he could feel was the sharp sting of his wrists being twisted behind his back, the rough hands of Gage's men dragging him deeper into the compound. He fought to stay conscious, his thoughts focused on Rex even as his body ached from the rough treatment. But the world around him was fading into a haze of cold and pain. His vision blurred and everything seemed distant, muffled, like he was sinking underwater. But then in that disorienting darkness there was a flash of something sharp, a memory, a glimmer of recognition that pierced through the confusion. Jack fought to keep his mind steady, to keep his eyes from closing. His ears rang with the sound of Rex's bark, with the memories of days spent together. But as his body was dragged across the cold ground, there was one thought that anchored him. Rex was still alive. The sounds of dogs barking grew louder, filling the air, with a frenetic energy that stirred something inside Jack. His heart thudded in his chest, his body straining against the men holding him. They pulled him toward a large, open area, the low growl of dogs reverberating through the cold concrete walls. Jack was shoved to the ground, his face meeting the freezing dirt. His mind raced. He couldn't allow himself to be captured. He had to find Rex. Through the haze of pain, Jack lifted his head, his eyes scanning the area. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the room, under the harsh fluorescent lights, a familiar shape. Rex. The dog was surrounded by other dogs, all of them forced into an unsettling stillness by the men standing nearby. Rex's once proud coat was matted and torn, his body thinner than Jack remembered. But it was him. It was Rex. Jack's breath caught in his throat, the sight of his old partner more painful than anything he'd endured. Rex, the loyal, steadfast dog, now caged a shadow of his former self. His body trembled not from the cold, but from the trauma and abuse he had suffered. Jack's chest tightened, the desperation in his heart rising. But it wasn't the sight of Rex's suffering that made Jack's pulse quicken. It was the moment when Rex looked up. In the middle of the chaos, the noise, the tension, there was a flicker of recognition in Rex's amber eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For a split second, Jack saw his partner's eyes soften, a flicker of memory of their years together. And in that moment, the connection between them surged like a spark in the dark. Rex's muscles tensed, his body trembling, but his gaze never wavered from Jack's. Despite everything, despite the cruelty, the bond between them was unbroken. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he tried to move toward Rex, but the men were already moving to restrain him. They had seen the recognition, and it seemed to make them more determined to break it, to force Rex into submission. One of the handlers yanked on Rex's leash, pulling the dog away from the bars of the cage and into a cruel, mechanical stance. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough. Rex had seen him. Rex had remembered him. "Sit," a voice barked. A sharp command. Rex hesitated, his body trembling, his ears flicking back. But for just a heartbeat, Jack could see the dog's will, his refusal to completely bend. The handler gave a violent tug on the leash, jerking Rex back into position, but for a brief moment Rex had resisted. It wasn't much, but it was everything to Jack. The loyalty, the bond, it had survived. The handler struck Rex across the side, and the dog yelped, his body flinching, but Jack's gaze never left him. He couldn't lose him again. Not like this. The men around him laughed, oblivious to the unspoken communication between man and dog. Jack, however, couldn't look away from Rex. His body burned with the need to act, to fight back. But he knew in that instant that this wasn't just about freeing Rex from a cage. It was about breaking the control that held both the dog and himself captive. The loyalty between them had never been broken, even in the face of pain, even through the horrors Rex had endured. Rex's eyes remained locked on Jack's, a silent plea for rescue and understanding. And in that moment, Jack made a vow to himself he would get Rex out of here no matter the cost. The struggle between loyalty and cruelty raged in that cold, concrete room. Jack's heart thundered in his chest as he was forced to his knees, but his resolve hardened like steel. Rex was still alive, and that meant there was hope. Hope that nothing, no force, no man could take away. Jack's breath was shallow, his pulse hammering in his ears. He could feel the blood rushing through his veins, every muscle in his body tense and ready to fight. But he knew he had to be careful. The moment he made a move, the men would descend on him. Yet the bond between him and Rex, unspoken but unyielding, pulled him forward with a force he couldn't ignore. His gaze never wavered from Rex. The dog's amber eyes were filled with a silent plea. Even in his weakened state, Rex's loyalty shone through as strong as ever. The years they had spent together, the battles they had fought side by side, had forged an unbreakable connection. Rex hadn't given up on him, and Jack wasn't going to give up on Rex. Not now. Not ever. The handler that had struck Rex pulled the leash tighter, forcing the dog to obey. Rex's body trembled, the pain evident in his posture, but his eyes, those eyes never left Jack's. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, as if the entire world had paused to witness the connection between man and dog. Jack's heart clenched. He couldn't just sit there and wait. He couldn't allow Rex to suffer any longer. His hand twitched involuntarily, longing to reach for the gun that wasn't there, but he knew that wasn't the way. He couldn't let himself fall into violence. He needed a plan, and for that he needed to focus. He needed to remain calm. The men continued their cruel laughter, oblivious to the struggle that raged silently in Jack's chest. But as they turned their backs momentarily, Jack saw his chance. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. His body moved instinctively, fueled by adrenaline and the overwhelming urge to protect Rex. In a flash, Jack surged to his feet, his fists swinging. The first man was caught off guard, a punch landing squarely in his gut. He stumbled back, surprised by the force of Jack's attack, but there was no time to waste. Jack fought like a man possessed, his mind focused entirely on one goal, getting to Rex. Another man lunged toward him, but Jack sidestepped, using the man's momentum against him. He slammed the man into the metal bars of the cage, knocking the wind out of him. Jack didn't stop to check if the man was unconscious. His eyes were fixed on Rex, who was still in the cage, still watching him, still waiting for him. "Rex," Jack shouted, his voice raw. "Hold on, buddy. I'm getting you out of here." Rex's ears perked up at the sound of Jack's voice, and for the first time since he had been captured, he gave a small tentative wag of his tail. It was weak, barely a movement, but it was enough. Jack's heart soared, and he knew Rex was still with him. The handler was coming back, pulling a shock collar from his belt. Jack saw the device, the cold metallic glint catching the light, and a surge of fury coursed through him. This wasn't just about Rex anymore. It was about every dog that had been mistreated, every animal that had been broken. Jack wasn't going to let it continue. He would stop it here with Rex. With a primal roar, Jack lunged, knocking the handler off balance. The shock collar flew from the man's hands, landing uselessly on the ground. Jack grabbed Rex's leash, yanking it free from the handler's grasp. "Come on, Rex," Jack urged, pulling the dog toward him. Rex's legs wobbled, but his spirit had not been broken. With one last effort, Rex limped toward Jack, and the reunion was electric. Jack threw his arms around the dog, the warm, familiar weight of Rex's body grounding him. Tears blurred Jack's vision as he held Rex close. His partner, his friend, was finally with him again. It wasn't just about escaping, it was about reclaiming the bond they had fought so hard to preserve. Rex's head rested against Jack's chest, and for the first time in months, Jack felt the warmth of his dog's presence, a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. "Let's get out of here," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But just as he turned to make his escape, a loud crash echoed through the compound. More men were coming. The crash of metal echoed through the compound, jolting Jack's senses. He spun around, his heart racing. Rex still clutched protectively in his arms. The once faint sounds of barking had grown louder, more chaotic, as if the dog sensed the tension in the air. Jack's mind raced. They were surrounded. The entrance to the makeshift training compound was no longer a distant memory. It had become a battleground, and Jack knew there was no turning back. The bond with Rex had been reawakened, but now in the face of this oncoming storm, Jack had to fight not only for Rex's freedom, but for every single dog caged in this hellhole. Through the fog of chaos, a group of armed men emerged from the shadows, their faces covered in masks, their eyes cold and unfeeling. The leader, Gage, who had first threatened Jack, was among them. His expression twisted with malice. He moved toward Jack with deliberate steps, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "You really think you can just waltz in here, take our property, and leave?" Gage's words sliced through the air like a knife. "You're not walking out of here with anything, Mercer. You're already too deep in our business." Jack clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on Rex's leash. The dog was trembling in his arms, but there was a strength in his gaze. Rex was with him. They were in this together. "I'm not here to make deals." Jack growled, his voice unwavering. I'm here to end this. Now. The tension in the air was thick, crackling with the promise of violence. Jack's muscles coiled, ready for the fight. He could feel Rex's energy, too. His dog was alert. His body tense, ready to spring into action at the first command. Get him! Gage ordered, his voice cold and decisive. In an instant, the men lunged forward, their movements sharp and practiced. They were trained, organized. This wasn't just some random group of criminals. These were men who had spent years perfecting cruelty, and Jack knew it wouldn't be an easy fight. But it didn't matter. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Jack ducked as one of the men swung a metal rod at him, the weapon missing him by inches. His instincts kicked in, and he tackled the man to the ground, grabbing the rod and using it to knock another attacker off balance. The adrenaline surged in his veins, and the world narrowed to just a few things. Rex and the gang that stood between him and the door. The dogs in the cages howled as if they were cheering him on. Their cries fueled him, and he fought harder, using everything at his disposal. His fists collided with the faces of the men who came at him, his body moving in a blur of trained muscle and fury. Rex was right there, so close, and Jack couldn't afford to waste a second. Rex barked fiercely as one of the attackers got too close, and Jack barely registered the movement before he saw Rex's teeth sink into the man's arm. The attacker yelped in pain, stumbling back as Jack pushed forward. Good boy, Rex! Jack shouted, his voice full of pride and relief. But there were too many of them. More men were pouring into the compound, and Jack knew time was running out. He had to get Rex out of there, and fast. Just as Jack was about to make a break for the exit, a familiar, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Freezy! Everyone get down! Jack froze mid-stride, his heart skipping a beat. He turned to see Clara, a familiar face from his past, stepping through the door, her gun raised and aimed squarely at the men. Her presence was like a beacon of hope, a sign that they might just have a chance. Clara, Jack called, his voice hoarse from the fight. You came. Clara's eyes flicked to Jack and Rex, then back to the gang. She nodded, her expression serious. I'm not letting you fight this alone. We're getting you out of here, Jack. But we need to move, now. The tension in the air shifted, but only slightly. The gang wasn't backing down. The fight wasn't over. Jack knew this would be the hardest part yet, escaping. But with Clara here, there was a chance. There was always a chance. The sound of gunfire had barely stopped echoing in the air when Clara entered the room, her presence cutting through the chaos like a sharp knife. Jack's heart leapt when he saw her. After everything he had been through, seeing a familiar face from the past felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Clara, always steady, always strong, was there, a symbol of the hope Jack had been clinging to in the midst of the storm. But even as she stood there, her gun raised, the situation was far from resolved. Clara's eyes scanned the room, Jack, Rex, and the gang, and her sharp gaze quickly assessed the danger. Despite the relief Jack felt, he knew Clara was walking a thin line. The same loyalty she had once given him as a fellow officer now collided with the duties that came with her badge. She wasn't just there as a friend. She was bound by rules, by the law, and by what she had sworn to uphold. Clara, Jack said, again his voice hoarse but now tinged with the weight of disbelief. You came. I wasn't sure you would. I couldn't let you do this alone, Clara answered, her voice calm but firm. But don't get too comfortable. I can't officially back you up on this. I'm here, but this isn't an authorized operation. If things go south, I'm on my own. You're on your own. Jack understood the gravity of her words. Clara had always been a by-the-book officer, someone who did things the right way even when it wasn't the easiest path. But right now there was no right way to handle what was happening in this hellhole. Jack had made his choices long ago, but Clara had to balance what was right with what was legal. And the two didn't always line up in a world as gray as theirs. The men surrounding them didn't seem to notice the tension between Jack and Clara. They were too focused on the immediate threat, the clash of fists and the sharp bark of commands being shouted from all directions. But Jack could see the storm in Clara's eyes. She wanted to help, she wanted to fight, but she couldn't afford to break the law. If things went wrong, she could lose everything. Her career, her freedom. We can't stay here much longer, Clara added, glancing nervously at the entrance. They'll send reinforcements. We have to move fast. Jack's mind raced, the gravity of Clara's words setting in. He wasn't just fighting for Rex anymore, he was fighting for Clara as well. Her presence here meant everything to him, but it also meant risking everything. She had crossed a line to help him, and that was something Jack would never forget. They couldn't afford to fail now, not when they were so close. He turned to her, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Clara, I don't know how to thank you, but I can't leave Rex here. We're getting him out. I need you with me." Her eyes softened for just a moment, the flicker of understanding between them. Clara wasn't just an officer, she was his friend, his ally in this battle, and the only person Jack could trust in this entire twisted operation. "I'm with you," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "But I'm not going to lie. I don't know how we're getting out of this mess. We'll need to move fast. I can't guarantee any backup. If we make it on our own." Jack nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. The risk was enormous, but so was the reward. Rex was waiting for him, and Clara had put everything on the line to help him get his dog back. As the gunfire slowed, the atmosphere thickened with uncertainty. Jack's gaze locked with Clara's, and for a brief moment they shared a silent understanding, an unspoken vow. They would escape together no matter what it took. "Let's get him out of here," Jack said, his voice low, determination rising in him. This wasn't just about Rex anymore. This was about everything that mattered: loyalty, friendship, survival. Clara nodded, her eyes sharp as she looked around, planning the next move. "Follow my lead. Don't do anything stupid." Jack, feeling the weight of the moment and the deep, unshakable connection to Rex, followed her lead, preparing himself for whatever came next. The air was thick with tension as Jack, Clara, and Rex made their way through the labyrinth of cages and makeshift structures. Every step was a careful, calculated move, the faintest sound of boots on gravel the only thing breaking the silence. Jack's heart hammered in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through him like wildfire. They had Rex, but the fight was far from over. The sound of boots crunching through the snow, shouts echoing in the distance, was all the confirmation they needed. The men were closing in. Clara's eyes flicked to Jack, and the look she gave him spoke volumes. No more mistakes, no more hesitation. "We need to move now." Clara whispered, her voice low but urgent. She gestured toward the shadows, signaling for Jack to follow her lead. Jack nodded, his breath shallow from both the cold and the pressure of the situation. Rex's leash was tightly clenched in his hand, the dog's presence a comforting weight against his side, but even Rex's familiar warmth couldn't calm the storm brewing inside Jack. They had no time. As they dashed from the compound, the storm outside felt like a blessing, masking their movements with the howl of the wind and the blinding snow. Jack's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, his mind calculating every step, every turn. His body ached from the fight, but he pushed through it, focusing solely on getting out. Rex was with them, but the danger wasn't over. It never was. Behind them, the compound was in chaos. Shouts rang out, growing louder as the realization that Jack and Clara had freed the dogs began to settle in. The sound of gunfire rang through the air again, distant but unmistakable. The criminals were coming for them, and they wouldn't stop until they were caught. The group pushed through the snow, the trees of the forest becoming a blur as they moved deeper into the woods. Clara was at the front, her gun raised, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. Jack followed closely behind her, Rex trotting just ahead, though clearly exhausted. Jack knew they had to find shelter soon, or they would be running blindly through the storm. "Clara," Jack panted, his voice hoarse from the effort. "We can't keep running forever. We need a plan." Clara's eyes darted back to him for a brief moment, then forward again. "I know. We'll find a way out. Just stay with me." The air was biting cold, each breath coming out in visible clouds. Jack's muscles burned from the exertion, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Rex was depending on him, and so was Clara. They'd come too far to turn back now. The sound of movement behind them made Jack's heart race. They were gaining on them. More men coming through the woods, determined to take them down. Jack glanced to his right, seeing the flicker of light from a distant cabin. It was their only shot. They had to get there fast. "Over there," Jack shouted, pointing toward the small building. Clara nodded, her expression set in grim determination. They veered off the path, pushing through the thick brush toward the cabin. The snow seemed to grow deeper with each step, but they didn't stop. Not now. Just as they reached the door of the cabin, the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, the men close. Jack slammed his shoulder into the door, breaking it open with a crash. They tumbled inside, breathing heavily, trying to quiet their frantic gasps as they pressed themselves against the walls, the shadows in the cabin offering a moment of respite. Clara's hand was on Jack's arm as she looked at him. "We can't stay here long," she whispered. "They'll be here soon. We need to move again." Jack's eyes were wide with worry. The cabin was a temporary refuge, but the storm raged outside and they had no idea how much time they had before the gang closed in on them. Rex was panting heavily beside him, but Jack's hand was firm on the dog's leash. The bond between them was clear. The dog wasn't just following orders. He was there, loyal as ever, ready to fight if it came down to it. "We'll make it," Jack whispered, more to reassure himself than anyone else. "We have to." But the uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed heavily on him. Even though they had freed Rex, the road to safety was still uncertain. Every second that passed felt like a countdown. He had to keep them safe. He had to get Rex back home. The journey back to Ashpine was quieter than the chaos they had just escaped. The storm that had torn through the mountains had finally begun to calm, but its remnants still clung to the world. Whipping wind, thick snow, and the ever-present chill. Jack's body ached from the fight, his muscles stiff from the tension of the past few days. But in the quiet of the ride with Rex lying beside him, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months: hope. They reached the small town in the early hours of the morning. The streets were deserted, the only sign of life, the faint light in the windows of nearby homes. The world felt still, as if holding its breath for what was to come. But for Jack, the silence was a comfort. It was a sign that they had made it, that they were safe, at least for now. As they entered Jack's small cabin, Rex gave a quiet whine, his body leaning heavily against Jack's legs. The dog was exhausted, his body bruised and battered from the brutal treatment he had endured. Jack knelt beside him, his heart tightening as he examined Rex's condition. The dog's fur was matted with dirt and blood, his breathing shallow, but there was life in his eyes. Those amber eyes that had once been filled with the fire of battle now held a softness, a flicker of recognition. "Hang on, buddy." Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He gently stroked Rex's head, feeling the warmth of his dog's body against his hand. For the first time since they had been separated, Jack felt a sense of peace. Rex was home. Clara, who had followed them into the cabin, immediately set to work. "I've got some supplies in the truck," she said, her voice calm and steady despite the chaos they had just escaped. "I'll help get him cleaned up and patched up, but we need to be careful. He's not out of the woods yet." Jack nodded, watching as Clara moved efficiently, setting up a small area near the stove for the dog to rest. The warmth of the fire filled the room, but the weight of the past days was still heavy in the air. They had made it. But at what cost? Jack pushed the thoughts away. They could rest now. They could heal. Rex lay down on the blanket Clara had spread out, his head resting on his paws, eyes closing in exhaustion. Jack sat nearby, his gaze never leaving the dog. The silence in the cabin was comforting, but it was also filled with questions. What had happened to Rex during his time in captivity? How much had he endured? Jack couldn't begin to imagine the horrors his dog had suffered. Yet here he was alive, lying in the warmth of the cabin, surrounded by the people who cared for him. Hours passed as Clara worked to clean Rex's wounds, her hands gentle and experienced. Jack watched, his heart swelling with gratitude. Clara had risked everything to help him. Her presence had been the difference between success and failure. And now, with Rex's condition slowly improving, Jack couldn't help but feel a glimmer of optimism he hadn't dared hope for. As the evening settled in, Rex began to stir. His eyes flickered open and Jack leaned forward, his heart pounding. For the first time since they had been reunited, Rex lifted his head and looked directly at Jack. The dog's amber gaze locked onto Jack's, and in that moment Jack could see it. Recognition. Rex was still with him. He hadn't forgotten. He was healing not just physically but emotionally as well. Jack's eyes filled with tears, though he fought to hold them back. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was the proof that the bond between them, forged in battle and strengthened by love, had never truly been broken. "Thank you," Jack whispered to Rex, his voice choked with emotion. "We're home, buddy. We're home." As Rex's breathing steadied and he rested, Jack leaned back, the weight of the past few days finally starting to lift. They had made it through the storm. They had fought for each other. And now they had something even more precious, a future. For the first time in a long while, Jack allowed himself to relax, the fear and tension slowly dissolving. Rex was safe, and together they would find their way forward. There was still much to be done, but for now, they could rest. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jack knew that with Rex by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The days following Rex's recovery were quieter, more peaceful. The storm had passed both outside and within Jack. His world was no longer consumed by fear and uncertainty. Rex had pulled through, and the bond between them was stronger than ever. But it wasn't just the dog who had found solace in the aftermath. Emily, too, had begun to find a place for herself in the quiet cabin nestled in the small town of Ashpine. For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to smile, albeit faintly. The warmth of the cabin, the soft glow of the fire, and the peace that came with it were foreign to her, something she hadn't experienced in years. She spent her days quietly with Jack and Rex, though she often kept to herself, busying herself with small tasks around the cabin. But Jack could see the difference in her. Her shoulders no longer slumped with the weight of fear and uncertainty. She was still fragile, still bearing scars from a life no child should ever have to endure, but there was a light in her now. One evening, as they sat around the small kitchen table, Jack noticed Emily staring into the flickering fire, lost in thought. Rex lay peacefully at her feet, his body fully relaxed for the first time in a long while. Jack watched her for a moment, feeling the need to speak, to ask about the past that had brought her to this point. "Emily," he began softly, his voice hesitant, "you don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I've been wondering, what happened to you before all this? Before we met?" Emily's gaze shifted from the fire to Jack, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Jack could see the conflict in her eyes, the hesitation. But then she took a deep breath, her eyes steady and her shoulders squared as if she had made a decision. "It's not something I like to talk about," she said, her voice soft but strong. "But I guess if I'm going to be here, if I'm going to be part of this, I should tell you." Jack nodded, giving her the space to speak, his own heart heavy with the knowledge that she had been through more than anyone, especially a child, should ever have to endure. "I didn't have a home before I came here," Emily began, her voice quiet, yet there was a quiet strength beneath her words. "My mom died when I was young. My dad, he was never really there. After that, I was passed around between different people. Some were kind, but most were not. I was just a burden to them. I never really belonged anywhere." Jack's heart tightened as he listened. He could see it now. The pain that had been hidden behind her eyes, the life she had been forced to endure alone. The same strength that had driven her to find Rex was the same strength that had kept her alive despite everything she had faced. "Then one day I ended up here," Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly. "The people I was living with didn't want me anymore. I didn't have anywhere to go. I wandered for days until I found Rex's collar. I don't know how or why, but I just knew I had to find him." Jack was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, what kind of strength it must have taken to survive the way she had. But he knew one thing for sure. Emily was no longer alone. She had found a family in him and Rex, and he would protect her with everything he had. "Emily," Jack said softly, his voice full of conviction, "you're not a burden. You're family, and you always will be." She looked at him then, her eyes softening, a flicker of something tender there. Hope, maybe, or gratitude. She gave a small nod, but her eyes spoke volumes. Jack had given her something she had never known before. Hope for a future. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know." Jack smiled, his heart swelling. Emily was stronger than he had given her credit for. She had carried a weight far heavier than she should have, and yet despite it all, she had found a way to survive. The bond between them, Jack, Rex, and Emily, was now unbreakable. As Emily sat in the warmth of the cabin, the fire casting a soft glow over her face, Jack knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. They had found each other, and together they would face whatever came next. The crackling fire in the cabin seemed to slow the passage of time, its warmth filling the small space with an almost peaceful calm. Jack sat across from Emily, the faint glow of the fire illuminating her face. But despite the warmth, there was a heaviness in the room that Jack couldn't shake. Emily had told him bits and pieces of her story, but there was so much more that she had kept hidden, buried deep inside her. Jack had seen the strength in Emily, her resilience, her courage, but now as she sat quietly across from him, he wanted to understand. He needed to know what had brought her here to this point. It was clear that she had endured more than any child should have to, and perhaps understanding her past would help her heal. "Emily," Jack said gently, his voice full of care. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I want to know about your past. I want to understand what you've been through. If you'll share it with me." For a moment, Emily didn't speak. Her eyes lowered to the floor, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her sleeve. Jack didn't push, but he didn't look away either. He knew that whatever story she had to tell, it wouldn't be easy for her. Finally, Emily's voice broke the silence, soft and hesitant, as if she were piecing together memories that had been broken apart for years. "I don't remember much about my mom," she began. Her eyes still focused on her hands, but I remember she was kind. She used to sing to me before bed. I used to feel safe when she held me, but she got sick. I don't even know what happened, but I remember being so scared. Jack's heart tightened at her words, and he leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. "I'm so sorry, Emily." She nodded, her face hardening for a moment before she continued. "After my mom passed, it was just me and my dad, but he wasn't like her. He wasn't kind. He'd disappear for days, sometimes weeks, and when he came back, he was different. Sometimes he didn't even recognize me." Jack's chest clenched at the rawness in her voice. Emily had been abandoned not once but twice, by her mother through death and by her father through neglect. The world she had known was one of constant uncertainty, and it had shaped her into someone who had learned to survive on her own even when she didn't have to. Emily paused, her eyes flashing with the faintest spark of anger. "I learned not to trust people. I learned to keep to myself. When Dad wasn't around, I had to take care of myself. I'd try to get food, try to find a place to stay, but it was always hard. People looked at me like I was a burden, like I wasn't worth the effort." Jack's heart ached for her. He had known pain, but not like this. Not the kind of abandonment that could destroy a person from the inside. He had seen the anger in Emily's eyes, but now as she spoke, he could see the vulnerability beneath the hard exterior. She wasn't angry. She was hurt. "I ran away from the last place I was staying. They didn't want me there anymore," Emily continued, her voice low. "I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter. So I just left. And then I found Rex's collar." Jack's throat tightened as he processed her words. She had been alone, completely alone, struggling in a world that had abandoned her. And yet Rex had still found a way to hold on to something, to someone. Her strength was overwhelming. She had endured so much, but here she was sitting in front of him, a survivor. Jack's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "You've been through more than anyone should have to go through, Emily, but look at you. You're still standing." She looked up at him, then her green eyes softening just a little. "I had to. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't just give up." The weight of what she had gone through hit Jack all over again. This was the real Emily, not just the girl who had found Rex's collar, but the child who had been forced to grow up too soon, who had learned to survive in the face of relentless hardship. And now here she was with him and Rex trying to piece together a life she had never been given the chance to build. Jack's heart swelled with respect for her, but also with a fierce sense of protectiveness. He had been through his own battles, but Emily had fought alone for so long. Now she wasn't alone anymore. She was part of something that mattered. "Together we'll build something better," Jack said softly, his voice filled with resolve. "You're not alone anymore. You've got me. And you've got Rex." Emily gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. The strength in her eyes told him that despite everything, she believed him. And Jack, for the first time in a long time, believed in a future where they could all heal together. The warmth of the cabin was a stark contrast to the cold and the storm outside. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with a sense of calm. But inside, Jack's mind was racing. The moment he'd shared with Emily had shifted something inside him. As he sat there looking at her, this strong, resilient young girl who had endured more pain than any child ever should, Jack knew there was something more they had to do. They couldn't just move on from the past. They needed to build something that would help heal the wounds not just of their past, but of others who had been hurt in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Emily, still sitting across from him, had been quietly watching Rex as he lay curled up by the fire. Jack's heart swelled with a deep sense of pride knowing that both Rex and Emily had come so far, but he knew that they could offer more than just a new life for themselves. They could help others who had been left behind just like they had. "I've been thinking," Jack began, his voice steady as he met Emily's eyes, "about what you've been through and what Rex has been through. And I think it's time to do something about it. We can't change what happened to us, but we can create something that helps others." Emily's brows furrowed slightly, her focus now entirely on Jack. "What do you mean?" Jack leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "A place. A center for animals like Rex and kids like you. A place where they can heal, where they can find safety, love, and a chance to rebuild. A place that gives them a future." The idea had been brewing in his mind for a while, but it wasn't until this moment, when he saw the quiet strength in Emily's eyes, that it truly crystallized. Jack had always fought for others, for his comrades, for Rex, but now he realized it was time to fight for the next generation. Emily's eyes widened as she took in his words. A center for dogs and kids. But where would we even start? "We start here," Jack said, his voice filled with conviction. "We start with what we have. We start with the land around this cabin. It's enough for now. We'll build slowly, one step at a time." Jack felt a sense of urgency, an overwhelming need to make this idea a reality. He wasn't just doing it for Emily or for Rex anymore. He was doing it for every child who had been cast aside, for every animal that had been mistreated, and for anyone who had ever felt abandoned. This center would give them what he and Emily had so desperately needed: a place to belong, a place to heal, a place to rebuild. "We'll need to talk to the townspeople, get the right permits, and maybe raise some funds," Jack continued. "But I know we can do it. We've already been through so much. This will give us a way to give back, to offer hope where there's none." Emily's face lit up with a mix of surprise and excitement. "You really think we can do this?" Jack nodded, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "I know we can. It's going to be hard, but I've seen what you've been through, and I've seen what Rex can do, and I know there's nothing we can't handle when we're together." Emily smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and for the first time Jack could see a flicker of hope, a hope that was finally beginning to grow, not just for him, but for Emily too. "We can give others a chance at a better life," Jack said softly, his heart full of purpose. "And we'll give them a place to feel safe, a place to heal, together." Emily stood up, then her movement steady and confident, and walked over to Jack, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're right," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "We can do this, and we'll do it for everyone who's been left behind." Jack smiled at her, feeling a sense of pride that was almost overwhelming. He had found his purpose. They had found their purpose. And with that, they would begin to build something beautiful, something that would not just change their lives, but the lives of countless others. The days after their decision to start the rescue center felt like a whirlwind. The cabin, once a place of solitude and quiet recovery, was now a bustling hub of energy and determination. Jack and Emily worked tirelessly, every moment focused on one goal: to create a safe space for animals and children who needed it the most. It wasn't easy. They had no formal plans, no blueprint for success. There was no grand funding or community backing, just Jack's unyielding resolve and Emily's quiet strength. But that was enough. Every day they gathered what they could, repurposed old materials, and relied on the kindness of the few people in Ashpine who were willing to help. Slowly, the land surrounding the cabin began to transform into something that resembled the vision they had dreamed of. The first few weeks were filled with back-breaking work. Jack had spent years in combat zones, but nothing had prepared him for the physical toll of building a rescue center from the ground up. Emily, too, threw herself into the task, despite her past and the weight of her prosthetic leg. She carried wood nails and supplies just as determinedly as Jack did, proving time and time again that nothing could slow her down. The animals were the first to arrive. It wasn't long before Jack and Emily had a small group of dogs who had been rescued from similar situations as Rex, their eyes wide with fear and distrust. They had all been broken in some way, whether through neglect, cruelty, or abandonment. But despite their wounds, their spirits hadn't been completely crushed. Rex's presence among them was like a beacon, a reminder that survival was possible even for the most battered souls. The first few days were filled with challenges. The dogs needed food, shelter, and care. Some were aggressive, others terrified, and a few just shut down entirely. But Emily, with her natural compassion for animals, knew how to approach them. She taught Jack how to read their behavior, how to help them rebuild trust. The process was slow, but each small victory felt like a triumph. A dog that had been cowering in the corner would take a tentative step forward. Another might wag its tail for the first time in months. It wasn't just the animals that they cared for. Emily began working with children in the local area, many of whom had their own scars, emotional or otherwise. Some had been neglected, others abandoned, and a few were dealing with trauma that weighed heavier than any child should ever bear. Jack had seen Emily work her magic with the animals, but watching her with the children was something different. It was like she understood their pain because she had lived it. Each day, the small center grew a little more. Volunteers began trickling in, local people who had heard about what Jack and Emily were doing. Clara, though still bound by her position in the police force, visited frequently, offering help and advice and occasionally sneaking in donations of supplies. The work was exhausting, and there were days when the weight of it all seemed too much. The weather was unforgiving, and the center still lacked many of the necessary resources. But despite the overwhelming obstacles, Jack and Emily never gave up. Their belief in the center and its mission kept them going. Every dog that came through the gates, every child that found peace for the first time in years, was a testament to their commitment. One night, as the snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the cabin, Jack sat back in his chair, Rex lying at his feet. Emily was sitting at the table drawing pictures with some of the children. Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. They had done it. They had created something real, something that would help those who needed it most. But as the center grew, Jack knew that their work was far from over. There were still so many more animals to save, so many more children who needed love and protection. But for tonight, in this moment, he allowed himself a quiet sigh of relief. They had made it this far, together. As the weeks passed, the small rescue center in Ashpine began to take on a life of its own. The once abandoned dogs, the neglected children, and the volunteers who came from near and far all contributed to the place growing stronger each day. But among all the faces, both human and animal, there was one presence that became a constant, a symbol of hope and resilience: Rex. Rex had not just survived his past, he had overcome it. He had fought his way through the worst of what life had thrown at him, and now in the warm, safe confines of the center, he was beginning to heal. His fur, once matted and filthy, was growing back soft and glossy. His eyes, once dull with pain and fear, were now sharp with the alertness of a dog who had been given a second chance. Jack had always known Rex was special, but it wasn't just his loyalty to Jack that made him invaluable. It was how that loyalty extended to the other dogs in the center. Rex had become a quiet leader, a guide for those who had been abandoned, abused, or broken. His mere presence in the yard was enough to calm the most anxious of dogs, to reassure them that they were no longer in a place of pain. Rex had an unspoken understanding of the other dogs' fears. He moved among them with a gentle but authoritative presence, always careful, never rushing them. When a new dog arrived, scared and uncertain, Rex would approach it slowly, never forcing interaction, but always showing that he had been where they were. He would sit beside them patiently until they were ready to make the first move. Sometimes they would sit together for hours, Rex's calmness spreading like a soothing balm to the other dog's troubled soul. Jack would often watch from a distance, marveling at the bond Rex had with the other dogs. It was as though Rex understood something that no one else could see, that healing didn't come from just physical care. It came from trust. Trust in someone who had been through the same pain, who had fought through the darkness and found a way to walk in the light again. One afternoon, as Jack sat on the porch sipping his coffee and watching Rex move gracefully through the yard, he was joined by Emily. She sat beside him, the warmth of the sun on her face as she glanced at the dog. "Rex is amazing," she said, her voice soft but filled with admiration. "I can see it. He's helping the others, isn't he?" Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving the dog. "He is. More than I ever could have imagined. He's not just a survivor, he's a teacher, a guide. He's showing the others that it's possible to trust again." Emily smiled, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "I think I understand now why you kept going. Even when it felt impossible, even when we didn't know how to make this work, Rex kept going. He didn't give up." Jack's heart swelled with pride, his hand resting gently on Rex's head as the dog approached them, his amber eyes full of trust and love. He didn't give up. And neither will we. This place, it's not just about saving dogs. It's about showing them that they can trust again, that they can heal, just like we are. As Rex lay down at their feet, Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This dog who had been through so much was now offering everything he had to those who needed it most. He had become more than a pet, more than a friend. Rex had become a symbol of loyalty, not just to Jack, but to everyone who walked through the gates of the rescue center. And as Jack watched Rex settle beside Emily, his heart full of hope, he knew that together they were building something more than just a safe haven. They were building a family forged in trust, loyalty, and resilience. The town of Ashpine had always been small, quiet, and hidden away in the mountains, but there was something special about it. Something that made it feel like a place where everyone knew each other, where everyone mattered. And today the people of Ashpine had come together to honor the heroes who had sacrificed so much for the village, for each other, and for the ones who couldn't speak for themselves. The snow had stopped falling, but a soft chill lingered in the air, as if the whole town was holding its breath in reverence. The village square was filled with the flickering light of candles, their soft flames dancing in the evening air. The mood was solemn, reflective, but there was an underlying sense of unity and hope as the people gathered to remember the sacrifices made, not just by men, but by the dogs who had fought alongside them, giving their all to protect those they loved. Jack stood at the front of the crowd, Rex by his side, his loyal companion once again in his familiar spot. The dog's coat was now healthier, his eyes clearer, and his body stronger than it had been in months. But there was still a certain sadness in Rex's gaze, an acknowledgement of the past, of the pain they had both shared. Yet there was also something else, peace. Rex had found a place in the world where he was loved and cherished, a place where he could give back not just to Jack, but to everyone in the village who needed him. As the crowd gathered around the small podium set up in the center of the square, Jack looked around at the familiar faces, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the school teachers, the elderly residents who had lived in Ashpine their entire lives. They were all here, their eyes soft with gratitude and admiration for the sacrifices made by those who had served both human and animal. A veteran of the local police force stepped forward, his uniform crisp and his eyes somber. He had worked alongside Jack in the past and knew the sacrifices that had been made. "Today, we remember those who gave their lives for our safety," he began, his voice steady. "But we also remember those who walked beside us, those who never asked for recognition, who never sought glory. The dogs. our loyal companions who helped us fight, who never wavered in the face of danger, who gave everything for us. The crowd remained silent as the names of the fallen were read aloud. Then the officer paused, his gaze shifting to Jack and Rex, who stood at the front. We also honor one dog in particular today, Rex the German Shepherd, who gave everything to save lives and protect his partner, Jack Mercer. We thank you for bringing Rex home, for showing us the strength of loyalty, and for giving us a lesson in the power of love. Jack's chest tightened at the mention of Rex's name. He had never thought of himself as a hero, but today, as the town looked at him with admiration, he felt a deep sense of pride. But it was not just his own actions he was proud of. It was Rex, the dog who had taught him more about loyalty, sacrifice, and love than anyone ever could. As the memorial continued, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Emily standing beside him, her face soft with emotion. She too had felt the weight of the day's ceremony, the recognition not just of the human heroes, but of the dogs who had fought alongside them. "I'm proud of you," Emily whispered, her voice filled with warmth. "Of both of you. Rex is more than just a dog, he's a hero." Jack smiled at her, a quiet tear slipping down his cheek. "We're all heroes in our own way," he replied softly, his voice thick with emotion. As the ceremony came to a close, the crowd began to disperse, but Jack and Emily stood there for a moment longer, side by side with Rex. The town had come together to honor their heroes, but for Jack, the true honor was in the quiet moments, the moments when he could hold Rex, when he could be a part of something bigger than himself. Together, they had found their way through the storm. Together, they had built something worth fighting for. And now, with Emily by his side and Rex as the living symbol of their loyalty and resilience, Jack knew that their journey wasn't just about survival. It was about living. The snow had stopped falling, but the air remained crisp, the sky clear and stretched wide above the small cabin in Ashpine. Life had settled into a peaceful rhythm for Jack, Emily, and Rex. The cabin, once a place of solitude and lingering grief, now felt like a home, alive with laughter, warmth, and love. Jack sat on the porch one quiet evening, the setting sun casting a soft golden glow across the snowy landscape. Rex was lying beside him, his head resting contentedly on his paws. Emily was just inside, humming a quiet tune as she worked at the table. It was moments like these that Jack held on to, moments where everything seemed to fall into place, where the weight of the world felt light and the sense of loss had finally begun to fade. The center they had built was flourishing, with more dogs arriving each week, each one finding solace in the warmth of the place they had created. Jack often found himself marveling at how far they had come from the chaos of Rex's rescue to the quiet family they had formed. But it wasn't just about the animals they cared for. It was about the bond that had formed between them, the shared strength they had all found in each other. Emily had become more than just a friend. She had become his daughter, the light in the cabin that made everything brighter. They had both suffered, both had known loss, but now they had each other. And that was more than enough. Jack looked down at Rex, his loyal companion, whose once weary body was now strong and full of life. Rex had become more than just a dog to Jack. He was a reminder of the power of love and loyalty. He was a living testament to the healing power of trust and the unspoken bond that could never be broken. Rex had seen Jack through his darkest days, and Jack had returned the favor, giving the dog a second chance at life, a life filled with peace and love. Together they had found a new family, one built not on blood, but on loyalty, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to each other. "You're more than just a dog, aren't you, Rex?" Jack whispered, his hand gently stroking the dog's fur. Rex looked up at him, those familiar amber eyes filled with understanding, as if he knew exactly what Jack was feeling. He gave a small, contented sigh and rested his head back on his paws. From inside the cabin, Emily poked her head out the door, her face lit up with a smile. "What are you two doing out here? Come inside, dinner's ready." Jack smiled, his heart full, as he stood up and walked inside. Emily had come a long way since they had first met, and though she still carried the weight of her past, she had found a new sense of purpose. Jack knew that her future was now full of promise, full of possibilities, just as his own was. The three of them sat together at the table that evening, sharing a quiet meal. The cabin was warm, the scent of homemade stew filling the air. Rex lay at their feet, content and peaceful. Emily was talking about something funny that had happened earlier in the day with one of the new dogs, and Jack couldn't help but smile. This was what family was. It wasn't about perfection or grand gestures. It was about being there for each other no matter what. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to plans for the future. The rescue center's growth, the children they hoped to help, the dogs that still needed care. But in that moment, Jack didn't feel the weight of the future pressing on him. He felt only the deep satisfaction of knowing that together they had created something beautiful. Jack looked around the table at Emily and Rex, his heart swelling with a love that he had never known he was capable of. They were his family, now bound not by blood, but by something far stronger: unconditional love and loyalty. And as the night fell and the stars began to shine brightly over Ashpine, Jack knew deep in his soul that no matter what came next, they would face it together. They were no longer broken pieces of a shattered past. They were a family, and that was all that mattered. In the end, this story is a powerful reminder of the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, particularly the loyal and courageous German Shepherd. Through the journey of Jack, Rex, and Emily, we witness not just survival, but a transformation driven by love, trust, and sacrifice. Rex, a symbol of unwavering loyalty, teaches us that no matter the hardships we face, loyalty and love can guide us through the darkest times. This story highlights the profound impact animals have on our lives, especially when they offer unconditional love and companionship in moments of need. German Shepherds, with their intelligence, bravery, and devotion, are not just pets. They are family. Rex's journey from a place of abuse and neglect to a life of peace and care embodies the healing power of love and compassion. The tale of Jack and Emily shows us that even in the face of unimaginable loss, we have the strength to rebuild and create something meaningful. Loving and caring for animals, especially those who have been mistreated, gives them a chance at a new life. Just as we too can heal and find redemption by offering love and support to others. Ultimately, the message is clear: through compassion and the power of loyalty, we can overcome our struggles. Whether it's rescuing a dog or providing a home for a child in need, the act of giving, of loving without conditions, is what builds a stronger, more connected world. And like Rex, who found his way back to Jack, we too can find our way. Through love, through trust, and through the unwavering belief that we are never truly alone. Let us all strive to live with the same loyalty and love that our animal companions offer so freely.